And as mentioned, President Trump has nominated former Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh to be the next chair of the Federal Reserve. Let's dive into what a confirmation could mean for the country with Tie Lasater, the CEO of Lasater Capital. Tie, it's great to have you on the show with us. Give us an idea of how a central bank headed by Warsh could affect the average American's finances, anyone from blue-collar workers to small business owners.
Kevin, thanks for having me on. And absolutely. So, I think Warsh was really public back in 08 and 09 in the subprime crisis, as well as his stance. And at that point, he was really against rapid and large interest rate cuts, more of a fear out of the inflation that would pursue because of that and because of the ease at spending. And so we've seen that repeated again here. I think what we have seen with our current Fed chair is a reactive approach, looking at what happens in the economy first and then reacting to that instead of taking a proactive economic approach. And so I think obviously interest rates needed to come down. They came down way too slow at what they needed to come down to. I think we have seen them get to about a level that's a reasonable level because, let's face it, when interest rates are at or near zero, lenders have to push so much debt and they have to get money moving in order to make any money. And that's when mistakes are made. So there is a reasonable rate, and I think we're going to see that rate be somewhere in the fives. I think we're going to just have to get accustomed to that. As an investor myself who invests in real estate and deploys capital using debt and leverage, I can work with 5%. I can underwrite projects. I can look at assets and deploy capital when rates are in the 5% range. But what that does is that creates an opportunity for developers to get back and start addressing our housing program and our housing crisis that we have in America right now. And, we've had inflation that was out of control, but that inflation also was impacting our housing market. And we've got just an unaffordability that is because of a supply and demand issue. We have developers that have not been building, and we have residents and people here in America that need a place to live. And so bringing interest rates down to a reasonable rate will allow us to start developing again and addressing that supply and demand problem.
So, Ty, I follow what you're saying. President Trump wants lower rates. He's saying it's too hard for Americans to borrow money. As you were just touching on, we know that Warsh was a little bit hesitant to lower rates in the Great Recession. There's some economists that point that out. But, we just came off this pandemic, this inflation surge. What would that mean for maybe a Warsh Fed?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that it will mean is that we can see a little bit of consistency back in the economy again. We have not seen that even coming out of COVID. We had rampant government spending coming out of COVID. We had subsidies, and those subsidies created a false sense of wealth and or income. And that ultimately led to individuals buying and consuming more goods than they otherwise would have, coming out of a scenario where we were not developing product. And so we had a supply and demand issue. Then fast forward that into extremely low interest rates at the time and more spending. And so interest rates had to adjust in order to address the inflation. They went sky high, and I think they stayed high too long, ultimately leading to an affordability crisis across the United States. And so we're going to see under Warsh a consistency. And that is what we need to see. As consumers, as investors, really as anyone in America, we need some consistency. And I'm not saying that we cannot have zero inflation. There has to be some nominal amount of inflation, but it has to be consistent and reasonable that we can address and that we can account for. And then we have to be able to address the wage issue. And what we've seen with the border control that we've enacted under this current administration is that we are addressing the border issue, which is creating opportunities around jobs here in the United States, and then bringing manufacturing back into the United States addresses that as well. When you bring interest rates down as well, that allows developers and real estate investors like myself to deploy capital into a market that creates more jobs in America than anything else in real estate. So when real estate investors are actively pursuing and actively developing, we can much quicker address the job and wage issue as well, which creates more consistency in our economy as a whole.
Exactly, and that's what Americans want. Now, Warsh, just to point out and to add context, he said that the Fed's post-COVID response was the worst macroeconomic policy in 45 years. Now, a Forbes opinion article said they had mixed success, but I mean, it's over 20% cumulative inflation since the pandemic. So really, really a crunch. Now, some raise concerns about the independence of the Federal Reserve under Warsh. Is this a concern for you? How are you looking at things?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still a human being fulfilling a role. And so I think there's always, no matter what, going to be some sort of an independence issue. And so when a Fed chair takes position, they are going to have their own opinions, and they either align with the current administration or they don't. And we're going to see those types of decisions made. And in this circumstance, they more closely align with the administration. And so we can expect that going into that this Fed chair is going to make decisions that are more in line with the current administration. But that's a human nature. At the end of the day, this is not a robot fulfilling a position. It is a human that has opinions. They may base those opinions on facts, and those facts are then led to them making decisions based on the way that they feel best at that time. And so, I think we've got an independent approach here, and it's as independent as it can be. But there is still a human nature involved. And I think that's a good thing. We have to have that because a human can adjust accordingly to the economy in a way that is from personal experience as opposed to completely taking the personal experience out of it.
Well, Ty, it's all definitely in your wheelhouse. Now, right to the heart of it, what does this mean for investors, this nomination, both institutional and private citizens?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic opportunity. Trump all along has said that his first approach and his first focus is Main Street. Once he addresses Main Street, then he can take care of whatever issues come from Wall Street. And right now, Main Street's biggest issue is inflation and the housing crisis. And so for investors, this is a huge opportunity to We've got an equities market that is trading at 4 and 5 times book value, specifically in the S&P 500. So we're at an all-time high. Now is the time to take some chips off the table, deploy those into physical assets that are real estate and physical assets where you can control and own something, not a piece of paper. Take some chips off the table, recognize your gains, and diversify at this point on a focus where the president and the Fed chair is focused on building out America right now. And that's Main Street. And that's going to be done through real estate. So we're going to see some opportunities over the next 6 to 12 months where investors need to take advantage. If they sit back and watch, they're going to see a correction in the market, and they're going to miss out on the opportunities that real estate is going to bring over the next 6 to 12 months.
Got it. All right. We just have 1 minute left. I want to talk about China. Warsh wrote an op-ed in 2021 in the Wall Street Journal saying that China is trying to, quote, replace the U.S. as the preferred destination for foreign capital. How could this recognition of China's goal play into his work as Fed chair?
Well, they were on a way to do that originally when we were the last people to reduce interest rates, and we had outside Chinese money putting their money into the United States. And what they're doing is they're bringing in outside capital, deploying it there in China, and then redeploying it here in the United States because they had lower interest rates than we did. And so we'll be bringing in a Fed chair that is going to address interest rates. We're going to be more in line with the global market, and it'll make local investors, U.S. investors, more susceptible to focusing on building out the infrastructure right here in our home country.
Understood. And Senator Jim Banks praised Trump's pick of Warsh and Warsh himself for that exact position on Tie Lasater. Thanks for coming on. Great talk.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kevin.